If one man offers you democracy and another offers you a bag of grain, at what stage of starvation will you prefer the grain to the vote?
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Book, Songs and Other Magic. My name's Gareth, and this is a little bit of a different kind of video. It's basically a video about a man that I think is really interesting. Someone I've read a lot of his books, and I've seen lots of interviews with him on YouTube and stuff, and I just think he's an interesting man. And I thought it'd be interesting to put up a video about 5 books that I'd recommend that you have a look at if you're interested in this man. And I'd love to see anyone comment on whether they are interested in him as well, and what you guys think of the books and that kind of thing. So I'm talking about Bertrand Russell. So Bertrand Russell was a mathematician first, then he became a very influential philosopher and social commentator, political commentator. He appeared on TV a lot in the 50s and 60s, a lot, I think, possibly earlier than that. But, well, no, it wouldn't have been earlier than that. But yeah, he had a big influence. He was a really interesting commentator. And he wrote lots of books that have been applauded by critics over the years and been like milestones in philosophy. So, Bertrand Russell was born in 1872, and he lived till the age of 82, so he died in 1970. So he had, you know, a long influence with his books and his thoughts and his radio appearances as well. And he studied maths and philosophy at Cambridge University. So that's why he kind of made those two things his career, if you like. And in 1918, he was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment for publicly lecturing against the war with Germany, which I think is really interesting. And that sort of bounces me into one of the big strands in his life, which was pacifism. So he was always arguing for peace, and he was a very strong, committed, passionate advocate for pacifism. Later on, as we get into the Second World War, he does actually say that it gets more complex when you got a situation like Hitler, and he, you know, sort of pulled back a little bit on the pacifism, which I think is interesting. But I first became kind of gripped by what he was saying because of that. Well, 2 things really: the pacifist thing, and also the fact that it was kind of some of his writings were allusions to socialism, or made lots of comments about socialism. So that made me want to read them. So yeah, he was imprisoned in 1918, which is kind of interesting. And in 1927, he released a controversial book that I'm going to talk about in a minute, which was Why I'm Not a Christian, where he talks about faith, and he talks about morals, and he talks about how what he feels about what most people would call organized religion. But I don't really like that phrase, religion as a thing. And in 1929, he released another book called Marriage and Morals. And that's another controversial book where he was basically dissecting and criticizing and putting forward alternatives to the old-fashioned Victorian ideas about marriage. And it was partly controversial as well because he had a very what's the word, cavalier attitude to his marriage himself. So yeah, very interesting man. So let's talk about these books. So first off, a book that I would recommend to anybody interested in philosophy, and that's this big old tome, which is A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. It's a really, really good. I'll just check when it came out. I need to do that with these books, so give it more context. So this book came out in 1946, and just at the beginning here it says, remains to this day the most lucid introduction to European political thought. That's the Times, and should never be out of print is what the Evening Standard says. It really is an awesome book. Ray Monk says, the history of Western philosophy remains unchallenged as the perfect introduction to its subject. Russell writes with the kind of verve, freshness, and personal engagement that lesser spirits would never have permitted themselves. It's such a brilliant book. I devoured it when I was a student, and I think it's just essential reading. So yeah. Just worth saying as well that all of these books are Routledge classics, and the Routledge imprint is a really good book imprint, a source for academic books. So I think they're really cool covers as well, designs. But yeah, Routledge classics are awesome. So yeah, this goes right back. So it's got ancient philosophy, all the bits in between, and into modern philosophy. So it really does do the title justice, and it really is an in-depth look into Western philosophy. So massively recommend that book. Okay, so once I got that, I got really into him, and I started looking at other things. I found this one. This is a really cool book, Bertrand Russell, Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare. It's quite a loaded title, isn't it, really? Common Sense and Nuclear Warfare. So I feel very strongly about nuclear energy as well as nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons is an obvious thing to rally against, but actually I've got opinions about nuclear energy as well. The idea that it's a Pandora's box. And this book looks into that. And I think it's quite rare to find a book like this anyway by a political thinker of the 20th century. So it's pretty cool. So this one came out, just put these glasses back on. This one came out in 1959, and I'll just read you a little bit of the preface, the preface. I'll read you a little bit of the preface. The aim of this book is to show possible means of achieving peace in ways which could be equally acceptable to communist nations, to NATO nations, and to uncommitted nations. It is my hope that there is no word in the following pages suggesting a bias towards either side. What my opinions are concerning the merits of Eastern and Western political and economic systems, I have often stated, but opinions on these issues are not relevant in discussion of the dangers of nuclear warfare. What is needed is not an appeal to this or that ism, but only to common sense. I do not see any reason why the kind of arguments which are put forward by those who think as I do should appeal more to one side than to the other, or to left-wing opinion more than that of men of conservative outlook. The appeal is to human beings as such, and is made equally to all who hope for human survival. Brilliant. It's a really good book, and it looks at the issue, which was a very contemporary issue at the time because of the Cold War. So, it's still important now, by the way. We don't really talk about it anymore, but it's still really important. This one's an interesting one. Roads to Freedom. So again, another Routledge classic, Roads to Freedom. And the powerful book of political and social analysis, written after the dawning of the Russian Revolution and at a time when Europe seemed on the verge of political dissolution. Russell examines the main roads to freedom that we have constructed for ourselves since the 19th century. So this came out in 1918. This came out. This version of it was 1993, actually. Actually, that was when Routledge first did it. This particular one was 2002. Interesting. Yeah, 1918, and this looks at Marx and the socialist doctrine. Looks at Bakunin and the theory of anarchism, which is really fascinating. So definitely look at that if you're interested. And the syndicalist movement as well that happened in the early part of the 20th century. And it looks at the relationship between work and pay. Looks at the relationship between government and law. Looks at international issues with creating a new state based on the idea of freedom. And science and art under socialism, and then there's a hopeful chapter at the end which is called The World as It Could Be Made. It's a really good book. I like this book a lot. So, The Road to Freedom by Bertrand Russell is definitely one I'd recommend as well. So, we get to more personal ones here. The last one I'm going to talk about, you've got this one, which I did mention earlier, which came out in 1927, which is Why I'm Not a Christian. And this talks about how he feels about the Christian system, what he feels about the possible existence of God, and why he feels that it's not a very good system to live under, and that Christianity doesn't offer the world much, and how morals and ethics can be looked at in a different way. It's a really, really cool book. And I think it's it's still seen, I think, as one of the milestones in atheist literature. It's still a bit taboo, I'd say, especially in America. So I don't think there's that much literature around, but there has been some lately, because there was a kind of a, if you call it a new, they called them the new atheists, those people like Richard Dawkins that came out and wrote loads of stuff. Before that, there was hardly anything. But this was one of the things that was written on this subject in 1927. And then a very short one to finish. This is a really short book. So if you feel like, oh, I'll dip my toe in, then this might be quite good for you. This is called What I Believe. And this came out, just see when this one came out. This came out in 1925. Yeah, so I'll read the preface again. In this little book, I've tried to say what I think of man's place in the universe, and how of his possibilities in the way of achieving the good life. In Icarus, I express my fears, and in the following pages, I express my hopes. The inconsistency is only apparent. Except in astronomy, mankind have not achieved the art of predicting the future. In human affairs, we can see that there are forces making for happiness and forces making for misery. We do not know which will prevail, but to act wisely, we must be aware of both. So there we are. What I Believe. Another great book by Bertrand Russell. So if you're curious and you feel like this might be a guide to look into, then those are the 5 books I'd recommend. If you feel like, I don't necessarily want to know what he thinks, but I quite like the idea of the general book on philosophy, where he breaks down all these different philosophers over the centuries. That is an awesome book, so definitely recommend that. So there we are. Let me know what you think of him. Are you someone who has heard of him? Have you got anything by him? Are you familiar with him as a speaker on chat shows and things like that from your youth, maybe, you know, because he died in 1970, but he was on TV before that. Is that a thing? Are you just curious now because you've never heard of him? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching. Stay curious, everybody.
Picture of what it's like to